Lynette Saucedo. For the purposes of today's training, I'm a certified prevention specialist for Goshen County. I serve in that role under our county commissioners through the Wyoming Department of Health. And I've been doing prevention work for, gosh, eons, at least 15 years. And Carlos and I have been married for 27 years. We have 7 children ranging in age from 16 to 30. We have 4 grandchildren. We have trained in NEAR for probably the last 3-4 years. We are trainers in several other suicide prevention, postvention, and mental health models. I will let Carlos introduce himself.
And my name is Carlos Saucedo. I've been working at St. Joseph's Children's Home for about 25 plus years. So I'm really excited to be here and having this opportunity to be able to actually connect with you all from Casper, Cheyenne, wherever you're from. So I'm really excited to be here. So let's go ahead and get started.
So as Sage said, this training that we're presenting today is called NEAR training. This is an extremely abbreviated version of the NEAR training. We can have a NEAR training last anywhere from 4 to 8 hours, depending on the additional enrichment and activities that we do with the training. So today we just cut this version down quickly to talk really about stress and toxic stress and how that relates to trauma, and maybe how some of us are dealing with those situations right now in light of COVID-19 and the various issues that it has created probably in our families, our communities, and that kind of a thing. Please feel free to ask questions as we go along. You don't have to wait till we're done. And as Sage said, you can put those in the chat box or raise your hand. I will say that Carlos and I have a hard enough time keeping track of our notes and what we're doing. So we're not going to see the chat box if you send it to us right now. So you'll have to send those to Sage, and she's going to interrupt us and we'll answer whatever we can. So as Sage said, NEAR stands for Neuroscience, Epigenetics, Adverse Childhood Experiences, or ACEs, and Resilience. And really what we're going to talk about today, like I said, is stress and what stress and anxiety looks like, and also resilience as it's related to stress, and how we can address some stressful issues in our lives. Can I screen share now, Sage? Am I good to do that?
Yeah, go for it.
Great. Okay. So just real quickly, I just want to be able to share with you guys where this NEAR training comes from. This NEAR training was developed by Doctors Robert Anda and Vincent Folletti, based on a study done in 1991 at Kaiser Permanente. And it's important for you to note that when this study was done, it was done with over 17,000 participants, all white Caucasian, all with some level of college education, and all with access to health care, thus Kaiser Permanente study. So I think it's important to remember that when we think about the actual diverse makeup of the communities that we live in and communities in general in society. Definitely doesn't look like that. So that's important to remember. Before we get into the content of what we're going to be talking about today, please just take a moment to look at this reflection, and I'd really like you to think about it as we present this afternoon. And we'd like you to even ponder it further as once we are done today, and take the opportunity to come back and join us on Thursday and really kind of dive into your thoughts on this and any other questions or comments that you might have. So think about using the information that you're going to gain today in your communities, whether your community is identified as a family, a faith community, your professional setting, any community organizing or volunteer work that you do, and how you can use this information to support and foster resilient responses. And maybe really, what do you think resilient responses are in people's lives, including your own? And what would you like to be doing to help foster those resilient responses? Maybe something that you feel like your community needs, or you need, or someplace that you'd like to provide that assistance. And we'll visit this at the end of today's presentation.
Okay, so as Lynette had mentioned, the neuroscience, epigenetics, ACEs, and the resiliency piece of NEAR, um, there is an important aspect that I just want to make sure that I point out. And because again, those four models are in and of it, they're trained in and of itself separately. With the neuroscience, I'm really going to try not to get into too much of the technical pieces, and I'm really going to try to lay it out to a point where it's basically, you know, really easy to understand, because it can get kind of technical and we don't really have time for that. So if there's any questions, or if I'm trying to explain something and again, I may not do it in a manner that is understandable to everybody, please ask, because I don't want to leave anybody with any questions from this afternoon. But when we're talking about the development of the nervous system, again, the main goal of the central nervous system, which consists of the brain, the spinal cord, and the peripheral nerves, is basically to help us survive. And what we're going to be talking about specifically today is going to be mainly the brain, but again, we're going to hit on the total central nervous system, and I'm going to make it real brief and real short in 5 areas that this nervous system helps us to be able to survive in our world. The first thing is that it generates internal signals that register our body to know what it needs, okay, such as, again, the food, rest, protection, shelter. So basically, our body gives us internal signals to let us know, hey, we need this stuff. And we know that from the time of conception, or time of conception to the time of when we're babies, because again, we have that internal drive to eat, to sleep, to cry, all that. So the next thing that it does, the nervous system does, is that it maps out a world for us, and it points us to where we go to be able to meet those needs. So again, we know that as an infant, if we cry, we know that there's going to be somebody that's going to actually be there to be able to provide that food for us. We know that support is going to be there. But the next part is that the central nervous system generates energy and action to be able to get us to be able to, again, to attain those needs. It also actually, throughout our life, it warns us of the dangers and the opportunities within our world to be able to make sure that, again, we're aware of those things. And the last is that it helps us to adjust our actions, or adapt our actions to whatever we're experiencing. So that's real brief in a way what the central nervous system does. Now, one of the things that I want to point out is any experience that will disrupt these processes in a lifetime may actually present some difficulties for the way we perceive the world, the way we respond in the world. And that is kind of what we're going to be talking about today, because it can be a single event, such as a car accident, or it can be something that's ongoing, such as, again, just stress, or the racial tensions that are happening within our world, or even the pandemic isolation that we're facing now. So real quick, what I want to talk about, again, going with the brain, is if you look on the far left of the screen, at birth, you see that there are very few neurons or neural networks within that slide, or the left hand of that slide there. And that is because, again, these networks basically provide what we basically need, such as, again, the impulse to cry, the impulse to be hungry, the impulse to sleep. So at elementary age, okay, around 6, 7 years old, you now see within the middle that those networks are now more dense, and they're pretty fruitful. So at this time, why do you think that there's more of those networking and they're being more fruitful? Why do you think that is, as opposed to at birth? If anybody, can anybody answer or generate a response for me on that? Why do we think that?
Carlos, that's a tough question.
I think well, so let me just point out that at elementary age, that's when we start actually soaking in so much information from around us that our experiences are actually generating the new networks. So we're taking in all this this stimulus from around us that is just providing our brains, and it's developing more networks. Now you see it in puberty at the age of around 14 or so. Now we start seeing that there's less. And because of that, that is actually happening because, again, this process, what starts happening is the process of either use it or lose it. So the more experienced networks that we find favorable, that we enjoy, we're going to be using those more. So those are going to be sticking around more. The ones that we're not using as much, we're going to start losing those. Now, the important part is within the development is, again, going back to any experiences that we might actually experience in our development. During stressful times, and Lynette's going to be talking about this a little bit more, but the amount of stress and the amount of experiences that we have will create more chemical imbalances or electrical inactivity that will affect the way some of this development works, which then in the long term, okay, or later on, might have an impact in the way we actually take in information, process information, problem solve, or even react or respond to the world around us.
Hey,
So,
Carlos, I have a question.
Yes.
So what happens to this development if children, for example, your elementary age kids, are told to repress their instinctive responses? So what happens if they're told, stop crying, you shouldn't be crying, and things like that? What does that do to this development?
You know, that's a good question, because again, depending, and that's where, as a parent, okay, as a parent, I have to start, especially around those terrible twos, and then you start getting into teenage years. You know, we want sometimes to stop and suppress those because of the fact that, again, for whatever reason, as parents, whether it be, you know, we don't have time, or we don't have the right answers, or they're just really energetic, they can actually become more stressed. And then at that point in time, again, the body develops what's cortisol, which is a chemical that will actually damage these neural networks if they're under stress for a long period of time. So if you have a child who's very, very active, for example, and we're always putting that red light, you know, up and saying, okay, you got to stop, and they're not being allowed to have that opportunity to be able to express themselves physically or verbally, then that may in turn create some stress for them that could actually put them in a long period of duress, which again could affect those neural networks and affect the way they actually respond and develop. So that was a great question. Did I answer that for you?
Yeah, that sounds perfect. I should also mention for the audience, that was actually a question that came from our chat box, but in the effort of keeping all these questions anonymous, in case you don't feel comfortable, I'll usually pose them as I have a question. So that way you can all feel free to ask your questions without having your name exposed if you're worrying about that.
Also, I think it's important to note, Sage, that when we talk about children repressing those feelings or those kinds of situations, one of the things that I did not really mention when I talked about the whole purpose of this initial study was to really determine how stress and additional trauma impacts brain development and how that can further impact health outcomes as adults. So I think, you know, the more people learn about childhood adversity and stress and trauma, initially, sometimes I think we go into these types of trainings thinking we're going to learn about children and how to better interact with them and how to support them. But a lot of times we start looking at ourselves, we start looking at our significant others or friends or family members and think, you know, this could really explain some of the ways that they react instead of respond to stress and life situations simply because of something, you know, that they may have experienced as a child. Even if it wasn't super traumatic, you know, when we talk about trauma, most times we go immediately to the really terrible stuff. you know, but sustained stress becomes toxic. And that creates its own level of trauma in a developing brain. And so I think it's important for us to remember, one of the things that we talk about when we go through this training is, you know, initially for a lot of people, when something happens and somebody reacts in a certain way, people want to say, you know, what's the matter with you? What's wrong with that person? When really we should be asking, what happened to you? You know, to put you to put you in a position where you feel like this is the way for you to respond. So as we move forward and we look at this slide, this is kind of a model of two different worlds, basically, that a person can be born into. So if we look at the bottom half of the model, really that's a child born into what we would hope for, a typical, if there is such a thing, family anymore, where there's plenty of safety provided, plenty of support, all the needs are met, you know, Maslow's hierarchy is in full swing, everything's going the way it should be going for them. And as those children develop, their brain seems to develop in a typical way. And when they are met with any kind of challenges or struggles in their lives, they look at those challenges and struggles as people, processes, and possibilities. You know, who are the people in my life that can help me deal with those? What does that process look like? And what is the possibility to come out of this situation? On the other end, those people, we look as they develop and grow, tend to survive the best of conditions. So they do well in a fairly typical functioning world. However, if, for lack of a better term, they're blindsided by something, they don't always have the skills to bounce back from that right away. If we look at the top part of the model, we see a child born into what we would consider a dangerous situation, or maybe just very unpredictable, living in a very unpredictable environment. And their brain development looks different as they grow. And they may not have the same opportunities like you had mentioned in the question, Sage. And really, when we look at that, they're under a significant amount of stress. And the brain and the body is designed to handle a certain amount of stress. Some stress is productive, such as stress that motivates us to, you know, meet a deadline, maybe get a new job, make a change in our life for the better, whatever that might look like. You know, so sometimes stress can be motivating, but stress can quickly become toxic. And what toxic stress looks like, listen close, is 20 minutes of sustained stress in any specific event or situation. So when we look at our lives and we think about the amount of stress that we might be under, 20 minutes of stress doesn't seem like a lot of time. But for children, when they're developing and their brains are developing, and even as adults, the more stress that we're under, sustained stress, our brain tends to look at struggles and challenges as fight, flight, or freeze. How do I fight my way through this? How do I run from it? Or I have no idea what to do and I freeze in the moment. And as this child develops and becomes an adult, they might actually, in some situations, be able to survive in some of the worst conditions. These are people that sometimes we think, you know, make comments like, wow, he can really think on his feet. You know, he really can change with whatever's coming. And, you know, Carlos and I, like I said before, we have 7 of our own kids. 6 of those kids I gave birth to, 1 I did not. And when we look at our kids as adults now, most of them are young adults. We think that even looking, we hope that our own children, our adopted daughter came to live with us when she was 6 years old, that our own children before they were 6 had a fairly typical upbringing, were supported, you know, fairly well, that kind of thing. And our adopted daughter really didn't have that experience. And as adults, there are many times when she is faced with adversity and challenges, and she seems to be able to get her way through that without, you know, a lot of meltdown. And sometimes our own kids struggle a little bit more with that. So it's really interesting, I think, when we look at those, and I think more than anything, gives us an opportunity to just think that even though people really struggle, it doesn't mean that there isn't something good that can come out of that, and that they can be very productive and go on to lead very rewarding lives. You know, we think about what kind of situations might be good for a person who tends to be that person. Edgy, hypervigilant, emotionally detached in some cases, or quick to act. And a lot of times those are our first responders. And, you know, we know what our typical first responders look like, But first responders can also be parents. First responders can be people in faith-based positions, teachers, educators, you know, people who are dealing with individuals who are really struggling in certain areas, whether those individuals be children or adults. And what does that look like? And so it doesn't, you know, it doesn't always have to mean that you're hypervigilant or that you're emotionally detached. But I think it's important to think about what that looks like for people.
So before we go on to this slide, are there any other questions that anybody has before we move on?
Great timing. Carlos, we had one comment from a participant that mentioned that we imagine that a child that has suffered either physical or sexual abuse, some of those really highly traumatic situations at an elementary or an early age, how does the brain protect them through repressed memories and things like that? And how does that affect their response through life?
You know, I'm gonna, and again, I should have qualified this. I am not necessarily a counselor, or do I have a degree in that? And I'm not sure if Tim, are you available to be able to actually field that question?
Tim is great. He's our clinical, not our clinical director, St. Joseph's clinical director. So he has a lot of experience in this. Tim, I see you just unmuted.
I did, yes. And that's in the chat. Is that right, that question?
Yes, it came from the chat. Yeah.
And it was, how does the brain protect against repressed memories?
Yeah, so that when a child suffers severe physical or sexual abuse at an early age, does the brain protect the child by repressing memories, and how does that affect their response for the rest of their life?
I don't know if if the brain protects it by repressing memories. I know that depending on the extent of the trauma, we will take on a primary adaptive strategy, and that falls into the fight or flight, depending on, well, several factors. But if you take, for instance, the age of the child, when the trauma occurs, little infants have no way to fight, so their response is going to be flight. They can't really run away, so it's flight within their minds. Depending on the type of trauma, their bodies will prepare for death. They become very quiet, motionless, and blood rushes to the core of their body, and they just prepare for death. They may go away in their minds as well. That's where we hear about people dissociating. So for infants and for little kids, and it can continue on because it becomes an adaptive strategy that the brain just takes over. That flight could just be dissociation. That adaptive strategy could also be the fight mode. And so, which is a little bit more, I think a little bit more difficult to identify because the flight mode can look like a disorganized child, an ADHD child. Most of the time you'll see, primarily with females, the strategy is dissociation, whereas with males, it would be, it would appear, even though it could be dissociation, it would appear sort of like an ADHD child. So I don't know if there's, the brain will take over when you are put into that position or situation of trauma where you're forced into fight or flight. And then the more times that occurs, it's sort of like sending, those neural connections are made, more of those are made, and it's sort of like sending your brain to the gym. That part of your brain gets strong, and you end up in a situation where your position on the arousal continuum in life is much higher. Your baseline isn't where the child that's gone through normal development stays, and so they're definitely more aroused. As a matter of course, they're just more aroused in life.
And I think go ahead, Sage.
No, I was just going to say thanks, Tim. And if you have more questions on that or looking for a more in-depth response on that, I think Tim was also open to private messaging as well.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Carlos.
You know, and I think that's kind of where we're at with this slide, in that when our biology collides with social expectation, we may run into trouble. Depending on the experience that we have had, there are different levels, different variations of how we will adapt to our world, depending on what we experienced. And I guess, you know, because what I'm trying to explain is that, you know, in the development of a child, for example, in my own family, we have different, our kids have different ways of interacting and dealing with, like Lynette said, stressful situations. And each one of them, we have tried to really identify, you know, how to intervene with situations when they were developing. And one of the things that I noticed is, you know, really you can try to do the same thing, but kids are different. And what may work for one is not going to work for the other. And you really have to, as parents, we really have to figure out and accept that there's going to be a balance of, and we have to figure that out. Where is that balance that goes from, okay, it's too much for one and not enough for the other? Because like we said, you know, I have a daughter who's very sensitive, very, very sensitive. And just a look, she will recognize that social cue and she will stop what she's doing. On the other hand, I have a son who may be a little bit more testy, and that look won't work for him. And there's more that I need to do in order to be able to get his attention, because he just, again, he has this development that he's just more, how would you say it?
He's a difficult child. He was like that as a 5-year-old, and he's still like that as a 27-year-old.
You know, and early on we were like, wow, there's a huge difference, but we had to learn how to balance how we need to intervene and how we actually have to adapt our parenting style. Because again, with my daughter, if I was to come down harshly, or if I was to do something, use some type of method that may put her under, you know, stress, that would probably be more harmful than helpful. And on the other hand, with my son, I need to understand that if I give too many, if I'm too lax,
or give him too many options,
then that gives him the thought of, oh, you know, I'm good to go. I can have free reign over this. So as a parent, we really have to learn that we do have to have some expectations, but we need to know the balance. And again, we have to look and recognize each child and how they actually adapt to the world.
That's true of adults as well. I mean, we all respond differently to stress. We all respond differently to the same stress. And so, you know, even when I go into meetings, if I go into a meeting for some of the work that I'm doing, and this is a really important meeting and I need to get all the information, I typically try to take more than one person with me, because, you know, 3 or 4 of us can hear the same thing and come away with a different perspective. And so I really want to get those perspectives from those people to make sure that I completely understand the situation. And that's true of working with our children, or with our spouses, or with, you know, just, again, coworkers, or being in whatever community setting we're in, is different people respond differently. And I think, you know, as far as COVID-19 is concerned, there are a lot of decent options, pretty good options for dealing with stress and trauma and tragedy and difficult situations. But most of them are ways to cope and manage those feelings after the difficult situation has ended. Like Carlos mentioned, maybe the death of a friend, or the death of a family member, or some other kind of illness, or a car wreck, something like that. The situation that we're in right now, none of us have a playbook for. And none of us are real sure how it's going to end, what it's going to look like when it ends. And, you know, for some people, they might be managing through this fairly okay as far as their jobs are concerned, their families are concerned, being able to access their, you know, the needs that they have. But others, not so much. You know, this has created a real work challenge for a lot of people, employment challenges, which in turn create financial challenges. You know, kids are missing school, kids are missing their friends, they're missing their education. And, you know, that's a developmental step that they're missing. And so it's really, really difficult for different people in different ways. So when we think about stress and how to overcome stress, we really want to talk about resilience and what resilience looks like. And so many times when Carlos and I do a full-blown NEAR training, we try really hard to focus the bulk of those hours on resilience and how an agency can work together to build resilience, or a community, depending on who we're training, and what that looks like. So in looking at this slide, we really see 4 factors of resilience. And obviously, if you have one of those in your life, you're really lucky and should really capitalize on that. And if you're super fortunate and have more than one of those in your life, you're even better off. So when you look at these 4, feeling social or emotional support and hope. Sorry, I can't read them very well on my screen, so I have to look at my page. Having 2 or more people who can help you and give you concrete help when needed. It's also important to note that those 2 or more people that can help give you that concrete help are healthy individuals. A lot of times, you know, especially younger people, adolescents, teenagers may say, oh yeah, I've got plenty of friends that can help me. We're talking about healthy individuals that can really help support you through something. Community reciprocity in watching out for each other's children, intervening when they're in trouble or someone else is in trouble, doing favors for each other, and social bridging. People reaching outside of their social circle to get help for other family and friends. So if we move forward in looking at basically the social emotional support, that first one in that list of 4, that can also look like psychological safety and self-regulation. And these are just some examples of some things that, you know, you can work on yourself to really kind of help yourself deal and develop some healthy coping skills and deal with that stress. So we see under activate social engagement, the healing power of community expressed in music, rhythm, and theater. Exercise and play, practicing connection, whatever that connection looks like. Could be connection to a significant other, could be connection to nature, to family, to your faith. Calm physical tensions in the body, belly breathing and laughter, massage, movement, and yoga, mindfulness and reflection, tapping acupressure points, biofeedback, neurofeedback, or EMDR. Those are specific examples of types of therapy. And we really encourage people to reach out for that clinical professional help because sometimes, you know, people struggle with making the decision to receive professional help, but it is amazing what these clinicians and professionals, what tools they have in their toolbox. And they can help you identify what you're struggling with and really give you some good feedback and some good options for different types of coping skills that you can use yourself as you move forward when you identify that you're struggling with something. Again, we talked about having 2 or more people who can give, 2 or more healthy people who can give good concrete help when needed. And this might be a great conversation to have at the dinner table or, you know, whatever, when you're talking with your kids. Who is it in your life that you can identify and really speak their name, identify a person who could really give you support and help if your parents aren't around? You know, have that conversation with your significant other, with other family members or friends. Who are those people in your life? And what can you count on them to do for you? And very importantly, are you that someone in somebody else's life? Are you able to provide a level of support to somebody else who might need it if you're called upon? And that really kind of looks like the community reciprocity. And whether that is watching out for children, intervening, like I said, when they're in trouble or when someone else is in trouble in the family and reaching out and giving that support and help, doing favors for each other. I mean, some of these are really probably pretty innate activities that we already do, but just really during this time to really take a look at those and really see what we can do to kind of build upon those. Even, you know, Hey, I'm running to the grocery store. Do you need milk? Something that simple it could be. Then we also look at social bridging. And social bridging, again, is just reaching outside of that immediate circle to access help or support for family or friends. So could be, as we talked about before, maybe you know somebody who's really struggling financially because of COVID-19. And is there somebody that you could reach out to provide some kind of financial planning or financial counseling for them, or give them some other options, help them maybe search out the ability to get a different kind of a job that maybe they can earn some money at. Could also be a family, maybe there's a single mom who's really struggling to try to work and still take care of her kids. And she's not part of your social circle, but you can reach out and a couple of you can make dinner for her for a couple of times, and give those to her to put in her freezer. These are all things that most of us already do, but really thinking about them intentionally during this time and really doing those things for other people also in turn helps us. It helps us feel better about the time that we're spending and what we're doing, and just our generosity and being able to share with others. Sometimes we tend to think we don't have anything to give, and quite frankly, we all really do have something that we can give. Nope. Okay, and this is not part of the NEAR training, but it is part of another training Carlos and I do called Sources of Strength. It's a training that we primarily do with youth, although we are looking at doing it with seniors and at senior centers too. We do this at our high school here in Torrington. And Sources of Strength is really a strength-based model and looks at what strengths people draw from to get through difficult situations. And we work through that with kids. And so, the model that we just talked about, the NEAR model, has 4 of those. Sources of Strength has 8. And we just thought it might be beneficial to put up this sources wheel, just so you can kind of look at that and see what those 8 are: physical health, mental health, family support, positive friends, mentors, healthy activities, generosity, and spirituality. So those are just some other thoughts on what you can capitalize on to really help you work through and deal with your stress.
So these slides are, again, they basically show the difference between the low support and low hope compared to individuals that have high support and high hope. And as you can see, if you have, again, any from those 4 or the 8 that Lynette was talking about, this actually, the data shows that when you have again, any of those within your life, that your limitations, activity limitations, would be lower if you have none. And again, if you look from 0 to 8 ACEs, which are, again, adverse childhood experiences, 1 to 3 and 4 to 8, if you have supports in your life, then your activity limitations will be much lower. The next slide actually shows your mental health, poor mental health, more than half last month with high support and high hope. You can see an extreme difference here in the low support, low hope, and high support, high hope. So, again, during these times, we're just, we're encouraging reaching out. And again, with the social isolation, it's extremely important that we find just different ways to be able to, get that support and that hope. So with that.
So again, if you guys will just take a look at this reflection slide, and maybe you can copy and paste it, Sage, and put it in the chat box. Or
I will put it in the chat box.
Just for you to take a look at this and really think about what it is that that your needs are in your community, whatever that might look like, whether that's family, faith, community, professional setting, again, community organizing, volunteer groups, whatever it is. But what you think is needed to foster resilient responses and really build community resiliency. And that includes in your own life. And what is it that you would like to be doing and what you think needs to be built upon to help do that within a community. And this is kind of where we'd like to start on Thursday when we come back. But please feel like you can come back with any questions, thoughts, comments, anything you would like more information on. If we can't give it to you, we'll sure find somebody who can. Sage, is there anything else? Any other questions, comments, or anything?
No, we just had a question about what are ACEs. We talked a little bit about them. ACEs are those adverse childhood experiences. And I think what I really took from that is no matter how many adverse childhood experiences I have, if I have a lot of support around me and I find and I can find hope, I have high hope, that I really am in a much better position either way, correct?
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
And I think, there are a lot of times, and again, don't want to get too deep into an ACEs discussion without being able to do a full-blown training. But ACEs is not a prognosis. It's not, it's not the more ACEs that you have and the more, adverse childhood experiences you have, the more trauma you've experienced. Doesn't mean that, whether you're looking at health outcomes or whatever you're looking at, it doesn't mean that, you have a doom and gloom outlook on life. It just means, and very interesting to look at, who has support and who has people to help them get through some of those challenges, and those who don't, and really how people can learn to cope and learn to respond to stress in your life as opposed to react to stress in your life. And there's a key difference between responding and reacting. And I think just knowing that about children and knowing that even about adults is really helpful when you're dealing with a difficult situation. And again, could be the stressful COVID-19 situation, and what brings people to react the way that they do sometimes.
Awesome. Well, Carlos and Lynette, you have given us a really thought-provoking presentation. I think there's a lot of things that we can really look at in our lives and look at as we look forward to being more resilient, not only ourselves, but as an entire community. We're going to wrap up right now because we've reached our time limit, just to be respectful of everybody's time. But I look forward to seeing everybody again on Thursday, where we can hopefully just have a really great discussion about some of those things that you've used in your life and in your community and in your parish and in your family that have really created that resiliency and really helped to foster that. And then we'll just kind of bounce ideas off of each other. We want to know what worked, what didn't work, maybe what we can implement, so that you can continue to build yourself and continue to grow yourself, your parish, your home, and community. So I posted that chat question in the chat box, and I've also posted a link to a couple of resources. First, there's county by county mental health resources, and then there's also a handout on distress tolerance. So thanks everybody for joining us today. Before we leave and say goodbye to you all, I would really like to end with a Hail Mary. I always turn to our Blessed Mother when I'm really in need of some hope and some additional support and love, because she's really fantastic in providing that support for me. So with that, let's say a Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Have a great week, friends. I hope to see you all on Thursday so that we can kind of share some ideas, bounce some things off of each other, and continue this lively discussion. Have a great week, and we'll see you Thursday.
Thanks all.
Thanks.